Take a listen to a few snippets from this track and let me know if you think that the average listener would be able to tell if this is a real band or not. So this video is all about making jazz fusion this way, which I did recently. That song you were just listening to is a track I released. You can find a link to it in the description of this video. And we're going to use that track to break down some stuff that I've learned over the past 20 years doing this, and during the course of this song too. So in order to do this convincingly, I think there's sort of three main points you need to take care of. The first being idiomatic composition, so that the notes and the rhythms and the overall structure that you're writing matches the intended genre, jazz fusion in this case. Secondly would be instrument choice and manipulation, so that the set of instruments and the actual VSTs you're using for those instruments are high quality and fit the genre, and as well how you program and manipulate them is expressive and matches a real player. And lastly would be mix realism, making sure that when you're in the mixing phase, you're giving the listener the correct cues so that they feel that what they're hearing is a group of real musicians in a real space organized in such and such a way. That's also important. So we're going to look at all that today in this video, and at the end we'll actually listen to a version of this song that I made where I ignore that stuff and we see what that sounds like. So stay tuned. So just a quick note on what I used to make the track. First of all, my DAW is Studio One. All of the instruments are from a company called Acoustic Samples. I really love what they do, and I've used their instruments for years. What if I use only their stuff, nothing else for instruments, and make a whole fusion track with it? So that's what this is. And then I have a bunch of third-party plugins that I'm using for mixing, for EQ and compression and reverb and so on. We'll look at some of that. So of course, jazz fusion is one of the most complex styles of music you can write, and for many people it takes many years of study and playing and analyzing and listening to really get it into you, not just the sound of the music, but also the structure of it and how the chords work and all this. So that was the case for me, and I'm going to try to give you my top tips here for the composition side of writing jazz fusion. But if you do want a deeper dive into this, like the nitty-gritty of this track and the harmony and the theory and what's all going on, I'm going to do that for my YouTube channel members. If you're interested in that, just stay around for the end of the video. I'll talk more about it. So I tend to write drums first for almost any section that I can, if the section is supposed to be groovy, and then that gives me a basis to write melodies against, bass lines against, and then harmonize stuff with chords and whatever else. As well, having grooves that contrast, so that you're not just one groove statically the whole way through. Every section has its own groove, and the sections relate to each other in a way that makes each of them more meaningful, by which I mean whatever defines a certain groove as being what it is, snare on this beat, kicks on these beats, hi-hat doing this, so on, the other sections that are surrounding it should in some way be contrasting or pushing against that, so that when they move between one to the other, each gains strength and meaning from its differences against the ones that surround it. So let's just take a listen to a few of the grooves that happen throughout this song and you can see what I mean. So here's the build-up. That feeds into this, which is the main groove. This is from the heavy part, the sort of breakdown in the middle of the song, this triplet groove. And And this only happens once in the song. This is not a section that repeats. It's unique. You only get it once. You get it in the middle. Everything that comes up leads to it, and then you never hear it again. So it kind of stands out as like a bit of a unicorn. It's also just a cool groove, so you don't want to overuse it really, right? But again, the contrast with the other two, I think, is what's important. It defines the identity of this section. So in my workflow, as I mentioned, I like to write melody after I've written drums. The drums provide the framework, the groove, I can feel it in my body, and that lets me create a melody that rhythmically meshes with the foundation of the track, and then the notes actually come last. What comes first is the contour and the rhythm, what I call the silhouette of the music, the silhouette, the sort of the shape of it, the shape and the rhythm of it, and the specific notes come later. And then we end up with a groove plus melody, which gives the perfect canvas for all these kind of hip, interesting harmonies that you can do in jazz fusion. But let's look at a couple of the melodies here first. So here's the melody on the build-up, just the relationship between the trumpets and the saxophones and how they relate to the drum groove. Right, so it's about doom doom da-do, doom doom da-do, doom doom dun da da. The specifics of those notes could be a million different things, but it's the contour there, it's the silhouette there that matters. Now the main melody is all about staccato, short, tight notes. Compare that with the one that comes right after it, which is all about long notes. Right, just like in the drums, it's important that the melodies themselves, and the harmony too, has contrast, gains meaning through difference. If it was staccato just a minute ago, perhaps it should be long now. If there's lots of notes, perhaps there should be few notes. If there was a melody, perhaps there should be no melody. Now, of course, the harmony in jazz fusion can just be like anything, basically. From the most sort of simple, mundane, diatonic stuff to just the most out, dissonant stuff you can imagine. Though it's not wrong to say that having a good grasp of diatonics with fully extended chords, the basics of jazz, movement, 2-5-1s and secondary dominance and tritone substitutions, modal interchange stuff is big. Parallel chords is big, where you take an exact chord type, like a chord quality or chord voicing, and move it in exact parallel around. In fact, that's what the first example is here. So let's just take a look. This is from the sort of intro from the song. And we'll listen to a stripped down version here where it's just the Rhodes, bass, and drums. Okay, so if we look at these, the first chord is what people might call, a keyboard player might call G over A, aka A9 sus4, or people might call A11. Basically though, it's a suspended chord, a suspended dominant chord perhaps. And this is super common for the genre, is to move suspended dominant chords around in parallel, like exact chromatic parallel. Now it's C9 sus4, which moves up to D9 sus4, E flat 9 sus4. Dropping back down, however, I break the pattern and we get this, which is a third inversion E7 over D, which is the 5 chord of the home, which is A. Then at the end of the build-up, going into the head or the chorus of the tune, we have these big bombastic sort of like descending chords. Sounds like this. So the bass is the same in all three. The top portion is a major triad and it's descending chromatically on the tonic. A little pause, and the bass is going to descend the G sharp into the G flat. So the G sharp is actually E major 9, or sorry, E add 9, first inversion, into C major 7, second inversion, I guess you'd say. into G flat, Lydian dominant, basically. So that means we've had bass notes all the way from A down to G flat, which is the final big chord, this guy, G flat. It's just, wild. Lydian dominant has always got that whoa kind of vibe to it. And then the first chord of the chorus here is an F type, and then that sort of sets us down into the main theme, let's call it. Now, it probably goes without saying that trying to make realistic jazz fusion in a DAW requires you to have high quality, realistic sounding virtual instruments. I mean, there's no way around it. If you're going to spend money on something to do this, this is what it is. In this case, like I said, I'm using acoustic sample stuff. This is because I really like physically modeled instruments versus just purely sampled instruments, because they're more flexible and they're more playable and more fun to use. Sometimes that means you miss out on a little bit of perfection in articulations because of the way the physical model works, but what you gain is enjoyable ease of use. So I'm always looking for new physically modeled instruments, and these ones I'm using here, the trumpets and the saxophones and the Rhodes and so on, these are physically modeled, and I think they sound great, honestly. So first up, I've got 3 trumpets played by V horns here, sounds like this. Now 3 saxophones, soprano, alto, tenor. We got the B5 organ. We got the clavy D9 with a couple shots here and there. We got V-tines for the Rhodes Mark I. V reeds for the Wurlitzer. The Sunbird acoustic guitar. With the Strategy electric. We gotta have a J bass. And lastly, we've got star drums. So even if you have the best instruments in the world, they just sound heavenly. If you don't know how to write for them or how to manipulate them well in the DAW, it doesn't really matter. When you're writing for instruments that you don't yourself play or really understand, you need to do your research to figure out what even is this instrument? How does it work? What is its range? What do people do with it? Can you bend on it? Can you play chords on it? A million questions that you should probably figure out if you're going to try to go for realism. One of the most important things to understand when trying to do this realistic thing in the DAW is that the sound of a real instrument is changing in every dimension, in every moment. Nothing about it can hold still. The timbre, the volume, the vibrato, the frequency balance, anything you can possibly think of. And when we're working in the DAW, we also need to be doing this. Part of it is going to happen automatically if your instruments are good, because they're going to be recordings of real players or they're physically modeled, and there's going to be natural variation and fluctuation going on anyway. But still, you need to look at what parameters have you been given to be able to control, and you need to control those. The dynamics over time, the velocity, the vibrato speed, the vibrato depth, the note pitch accuracy, if your thing lets you deal with that. Literally any parameter that they expose to you, you may as well be using and automating, right? Make bold expression choices, make bold choices of the velocity, of the timbre, of the vibrato, of everything. This adds to the fun, this adds to the expressiveness, this adds to the believability. It's easy to be safe, but being bold makes the whole thing. So as far as the mixing goes, believability is the key word here. It needs to sound realistic. What that means is that the sound needs to have the psychoacoustical cues that listeners are used to hearing with real recorded music from a band or whatever you're doing. And we need to emulate those, right? And a big portion of that is through reverb. So we're going to focus on reverb for now, because reverb gives the instruments a sense of place and space and relationship to each other. As well, it blends all of their sounds together within that space and produces this quality that we're used to hearing in the world everywhere we go. Now, basically every virtual instrument that you have is going to have some kind of reverb or room sound applied to it in the plugin or even baked into the samples. You got to be aware of this because you don't want 14 different room sounds all sitting on top of one another. You want one cohesive room sound. And to do that, you need to remove the reverb or the room from every instrument you're working with as much as possible. So we can take a look at an example here. This is the alto sax that I'm using. And Acoustic Samples has this whole situation with their V-horns and V-winds and all this other stuff where you can place your instruments on a bandstand and choose the microphones, and it's actually awesome. A whole bunch of parameters in here. But for this, I'm kind of trying to get it as dry and close and all the room turned off as possible. And because the instrument is physically modeled, I can do that to a great extent. So the way that I like to do the realism thing is to have one primary room that I create a reverb for, which can be as small as like an ambience type, like very, very short, almost imperceptible type of reverb, up to like even a large studio or even a hall if you're doing kind of orchestral music. But one room where every instrument is getting sent to in differing amounts in order to create a sort of sound stage where the instruments have relationship to one another, both in terms of front to back, that is how much reverb is being applied to them or how much we are sending them to the reverb, and panning, of course, as well as volume, all controls the sort of virtual stage that the listener is going to experience in their mind, hopefully, if we're doing it right. This is the fundamental point about the reverb setup. So in this case, I'm using FabFilter Pro R2 to generate the room, which is a modified version of their Studio B preset. And let's just take a listen to kind of what that sounds like maybe on the trumpets and horns here. So I'll have it off at first. Now on. So beyond this main room, I then have a larger sort of standardized long reverb that any of the instruments can access. This is sort of the like larger hall that I almost in my mind imagine being somehow outside of the main room. And when certain instruments need it, they can reach into this larger space, but this larger space is also accessible from many different instruments so that they all have a similar sort of blurring quality into this larger space. But in addition to that, then there can be one or several sort of unique flavor style reverbs that are just for specific use cases, like just for the guitar or just for a vocal or just for a particular synth sound or whatever it happens to be. Those ones can be, of course, very unrealistic. They're about blurring, they're about a special tonal quality, whatever they are. They're not about generating place and space with all the other instruments. In fact, they're about separating from, they're about being unique. So now we're going to take a listen to a version of this song where I've stripped out all the stuff I've just talked about. I've kept the composition the same, but the nice instruments are gone, all the mixing stuff is gone, the articulation and variation and constant change and all that is gone. And we're just going to see what is the effect of doing all of this little nitty-gritty stuff and taking care of every detail versus not. I also just want to reiterate that I'm going to be doing a deep dive into all the compositional, theory, harmonic aspects of this tune and fusion stuff in general for channel members. And you can check out the channel membership thing by clicking the join button beneath this video. And for the Mind of Max tier and higher, you have access to a playlist of videos that I don't post on my normal YouTube, but are available to those channel members talking about all sorts of theory topics and ear training and music analysis and music philosophy and whatever else that's going on. And so if you're interested in that kind of stuff, do check out the playlist. I'll link it in the description and consider supporting me there, which I do really appreciate. Thank you. Okay, so let's check out this stripped down version here where I've removed everything and, used stock instruments and so on. Thanks for sticking around. Let me know if you have any questions or comments or what other videos you'd like to see. Happy to chat with you. Appreciate your support. Talk to you soon.